Right now, when you need to go, you walk 10 steps and it's over. Clean water, a door that locks. Paper. You don't even think about it. For 300,000 years, none of that existed. No toilet, no plumbing, no paper. And this wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Predators could smell it. Disease came from it. Entire camps were abandoned because of it. So, what did they actually do? The answer changed where humans were able to live. So, let's start with the rule that kept everyone alive: go far away. Anthropologists who lived with the Hadza in Tanzania recorded it directly. You walk out of camp, past the last hut, past the last fire, until nobody can see you. Then you go a bit further. Children learned this before they learned to hunt, not because anyone was shy, because the alternative could kill you. Here is what your waste actually is, in a world without plumbing. It is a signal. A hyena can smell a fresh trail from hundreds of meters away. So can a lion. Leaving that signal next to where your family sleeps is an invitation. And there is a second problem, and it is worse. Human waste is full of parasites. Hookworm, roundworm, whipworm. They get into the soil, they get into the water, and they get back into you. A group that fouled its own water supply got sick, got weak, and stopped being able to hunt. So the rule was simple: distance, always distance. Now, what did they actually wipe with? Whatever was nearby, and it depended entirely on where you lived. Leaves, if you had them. Moss. Handfuls of dry grass. Smooth stones. Snow, if you lived somewhere cold, which sounds horrific and is actually very effective, and if you lived near a river, water, and your left hand. That is still how most of the world does it today, and honestly, it is cleaner than paper. We know all of this because of one of the strangest branches of science that exists: fossilized human waste. It has a name: coprolites. At the Paisley Caves in Oregon, researchers found human coprolites dated to around 14,000 years ago. They pulled DNA straight out of them. That is part of how we know people reached America earlier than we thought. Ancient poop rewrote the timeline. The most famous one was dug up in York in England in 1972. It came from a Viking. It is over 20 centimeters long, and it is now insured for nearly $40,000. It is called the Lloyd's Bank Coprolite. It sits in a museum. People pay money to look at it. And inside it, scientists found hundreds of parasite eggs, which tells you exactly how that Viking was living. Then something changed, and the whole problem exploded. Farming. For hundreds of thousands of years, the solution had been to walk away. But when you farm, you cannot walk away. You have fields, you have grain stores, you have to stay. And now hundreds of people are producing waste in the same place every single day, forever. At Çatalhöyük in Turkey, one of the first proper towns, around 7000 BCE, people dumped their waste into rubbish heaps right between the houses. Archaeologists found the parasite eggs to prove it. The first towns were, biologically speaking, a disaster. So humans had to invent something they had never needed before: a toilet. The oldest ones we have found are shockingly good. At Skara Brae in Orkney, around 3000 BCE, stone houses had small recesses in the walls connected to drains that ran out to the sea. Stone Age Scotland had plumbing, but the real champions were the Indus Valley. In Mohenjo-Daro, around 2600 BCE, almost every house had its own toilet, connected to covered brick sewers running under the streets with inspection holes for cleaning. That is 4,500 years ago. It is a better sanitation system than most European cities had in the 1800s. Then there is Rome, which got it half right in the most Roman way possible. Rome built the Cloaca Maxima, a sewer so large you could row a boat through it, and parts of it still drain water today. It also built public latrines, and this is the part people struggle with. 20 seats, in a row. No walls, no doors, no partitions of any kind. You sat down shoulder to shoulder with strangers, and you talked business. And then there was the sponge. A sea sponge on a stick called a tersorium, sitting in a channel of running water at your feet. You used it, you rinsed it, and you put it back for the next person. Shared. Romans were also genuinely afraid of their own latrines. They kept images of Fortuna, the goddess of luck, on the walls because sewers produce methane, and methane sometimes ignites, and flames coming out of the toilet is a very reasonable thing to build a religion around. Then Rome fell, and Europe went backwards for 1,000 years. Medieval castles had a guardrobe, which was a stone seat over a shaft that dropped straight down the outside wall into the moat. Attackers occasionally tried to climb up them. It went about as well as you would expect. Everyone else used a chamber pot and emptied it out of the window. In Edinburgh, they shouted a warning first: "Gardaloo," And if you were walking below, that was your problem. The streets of medieval cities were not filthy as a figure of speech. They were literally running with it. In 1660, Samuel Pepys wrote in his diary that he walked into his own cellar and stepped straight into a large pile because his neighbor's cesspit had broken through the wall. He was a wealthy man in London. That was normal. And this went on until it killed enough people to force a change. In 1854, cholera was tearing through London. A doctor named John Snow mapped the deaths street by street and traced them to a single water pump on Broad Street. The pump had been dug right next to a leaking cesspit. He took the handle off. The outbreak stopped. That map is the beginning of modern epidemiology. 4 years later came the Great Stink. The summer of 1858 was so hot that the Thames, which was essentially an open sewer, became unbearable. Parliament sat right next to it. They soaked the curtains in chemicals. They seriously discussed moving the government out of London. Instead, in 18 days, they approved the money for Joseph Bazalgette to build a sewer system for the entire city. Nothing motivates a government like the smell reaching its own windows. Meanwhile, paper. China had been using toilet paper since the 6th century. By the 14th century, they were producing it in bulk for the imperial court, in sheets the size of a newspaper. The West did not catch up until 1857, when Joseph Gayety sold medicated paper in flat packs, with his own name printed on every single sheet. The roll arrived around 1890. The flush toilet is older than you think. John Harrington built one for Queen Elizabeth in 1596, and everybody ignored it. The thing that actually made it work arrived in 1775, when Alexander Cumming patented the S-bend. It is just a curve of pipe that traps water and blocks the smell coming back up. That little curve is the only reason your bathroom does not smell like a sewer. Thomas Crapper, despite the name, did not invent any of it. He was simply very good at selling them. So here is where it lands. In 2007, the British Medical Journal asked 11,000 readers to vote for the greatest medical advance since 1840. Not antibiotics, not vaccines, not anesthesia. They chose sanitation, clean water, and a way to carry waste away. And it is not finished. Around 3.5 billion people alive right now still do not have a safely managed toilet. Your ancestors solved this problem by walking away from it. Then they stopped walking and had to solve it properly, and it took them roughly 9,000 years. Every city you have ever stood in is built on top of that solution. 10 steps. A door that locks. It is the least appreciated invention in human history.